Hello viewers, I am going to do a video today on Jackson's chameleons. I've raised Jackson's chameleons from birth to adulthood, and I'm a member of Chameleon forums, and I've seen lots of posts, especially lately, about people who have unexpectedly had a brood of Jackson babies born from one of their females who was pregnant and they didn't realize it. People have a lot of questions, so I decided to do a video outlining the methods that I've used in raising them. There's a lot of people who have posted that they've had problems with chameleons, Jackson's chameleons, reaching a certain point of development, which it's usually about 4 months to 5 months old, and they just unexplainably drop dead, and people don't really understand. It's still not really understood clearly what that happens for. However, my first clutch that I've ever raised of Jacksons, I've raised them to adulthood, and I had zero problems. When I had mine born, I was aware of this fact that they are delicate, so to speak, and that they have a tendency to not survive after several months of being live. So I was very attentive to make sure that I gave them the best care that I felt that I possibly could based on what little information is available. There's a lot of care sheets out there on the internet, a lot of literature and info. Most of it that I've found is pretty generalized. They'll say, you know, you need a screen cage, you need a temperature of 70 to 80 degrees, a basking spot, a UV, misting, etc., etc. Things that most people who raise chameleons, they already are aware of this, but there's not a lot of specifics as far as specific details about diet and temperatures and lighting cycles in particular. So I decided to do this video because I've been seeing a lot of posts lately on chameleonforums.com with people who have purchased Jackson chameleon females only to find that they come in one morning and there's 15 or 20 babies crawling around their cage that they didn't expect. And a lot of people have a lot of questions as to how to care for them. So I've had really good success with them, so I feel like it might help the community out if I did this video and explained some of the details on how I managed to raise my brood of Jackson chameleons. Okay, the first thing I'm going to talk about with my Jacksons is obviously caging. There are a lot of different approaches that different keepers have used with caging their chameleons. For the most part, it's recommended to use screen cages for chameleons. Chameleons need a good cross ventilation, and screen cage offer that better than any other type of enclosure. Glass aquariums tend to have a tendency to retain heat, so screen cages are my personal choice. But like I said, I'm not going to say that there's any one or other better method. Some people have had success with other types of cages like aquariums and terrariums that are partially glassed and partially screened, etc. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to try to relate every aspect of how I raise my chameleons in my video. I'm not necessarily saying that you can't have success using a different type. Personally, I raised this Jackson that we're going to take a look at later on in the video. He was raised in this cage from the day he was born. He's in there by himself now. He had some cage mates. They've all been moved to separate cages. But screen cages have worked well for me. They offer good cross ventilation. They allow for good UVB penetration with the UV light. You can see there's a lot of things going on here with humidity, misting, and lighting, etc. I'm going to touch on each aspect of that. But for the most part, generally I recommend a screen cage. If you use a different type of cage, I would strongly recommend that you have something that will offer good airflow. I've read and I have heard and seen posted on chameleonforums.com that upper respiratory infections are a common occurrence with Jacksons, and it can happen from being in an area that's too humid with bacteria in the air, and glass enclosures tend to be kind of problematic with that because they hold the air inside and they don't get fresh air and it becomes stagnated, and an upper respiratory infection can occur when that happens. Screen cages allow for fresh air at all times. So a screen cage, in my opinion, is the best thing to use. Whatever type of cage that you decide to use, there's a few things that you need to include in a good cage. A good cage always has a lot of foliage. Hiding places, you can use plastic or you can use live. Personally, I use live. Live plants give off humidity. It helps create a humid environment. The soil inside of it will give off a certain degree of humidity. And they also, you know, with their process of giving off oxygen, they're just a better choice in my opinion. I've used plastic before. It's really a matter of choice. You need lots of climbing branches. Branches so that the chameleon can get from the top to the bottom and then back up again if it wants. Plenty of perches. You'll have perches over underneath the lighting area. You'll have perches over under the unlighted area. This gives the chameleon several different options as to where he wants to find his comfort zone, so to speak. If he needs to warm himself up, have a branch under his basking light where he can get close to it and get warm. If he gets too hot, have a branch where he can move away. Just provide plenty of branches. Good foliage, live plants preferably. And that's basically how you should accommodate your chameleon's cage. Just make sure you include the branches and plants. Okay, we've talked about caging. Next thing I'm going to talk about is lighting. Lighting is very important with chameleons. Chameleons benefit from ultraviolet radiation. Everybody knows this who's chameleon keepers, so I won't dwell on that a whole lot. Provide a good UVB linear tube. This is an 18-inch Rectaglow UVB light. And then the more important aspect of the lighting with Jackson's is basking. And now the reason this is important is people need to understand that Jackson's chameleons come from Kenya and I believe parts of Tanzania, very high altitudes. They live in cloud forest type settings, which means they experience cooler temperatures and higher humidity. So with that being said, you don't have to provide as warm of a basking spot over as much of the cage as other species, say for example for panthers or veils. And like I said, there's other people who have other opinions on this, and their opinions say that it's okay to keep a warm, really warm basking spot. Like I said earlier, I'm touching on the way I did it. This is how I successfully raised a clutch of Jackson's chameleons. So this is what I'm going to focus on. We've got the UVB. I somewhat center my UVB, but somewhat move it slightly more to what you consider the basking side. The basking side over here is what we really need to touch on, and I'm going to put a lot of detail into this aspect of it. As you can see, a lot of people use these shop light clamp lights. I've found a smaller version. This is about a 5.5 or 6 inch clamp as opposed to the larger 8 or 9 inch ones. It directs the light more than the larger ones. The larger ones tend to let more light into the cage. This one focuses it more into a narrow beam. I chose this because it's easier to create a smaller warm area. With Jackson's, I feel something that is absolutely paramount to keeping them is not letting them get too hot. I never let my Jackson's get above 78 or 80 degrees, and I achieve this by all my chameleons are raised indoors. I don't typically raise mine outdoors. I live in the southeastern United States. It's very warm here during the summer. In the fall and early spring, I'll take my Jackson's out and let them stay when the temperatures are still in the low 70s, and at night maybe into the 50s. That's completely tolerable for Jackson's. But mine are raised indoors. My house temperature never gets above about 75, 76, 77 degrees tops maybe. So their ambient temperature is in the 70s, mid to low 70s. That's the target. You need to keep your temperatures for Jackson's anywhere from about 70, 72 to about 74, 75 degrees. That's perfect for Jacksons. I do, however, provide a basking spot, but I'm going to point out a couple of things about this basking spot here. As you can see here, like I mentioned before, the UVB light is somewhat centered, but then slightly pulled over a little closer to the basking site. The basking light, as you can see, is not resting directly on top of the screen. And it's also not pointed straight in. It's pointed at slightly an angle. It's diagonally facing through. This is focusing most of the energy through the cage, but out over here. It's not forcing it all the way into the cage. This is creating just a very small area of high temperature. Like I mentioned before, these chameleons come from Africa, high in the altitudes where the temperatures are very cool and wet. They don't experience high temperatures. High temperatures are, however, beneficial for digestion. So I do provide a small basking spot. This bulb that I use in here is only 40 watts. This area right here reaches somewhere between 78 to maybe 81, 82 degrees tops. Don't go any higher than that. If you see that your basking area is reaching temperatures in the low 80s, say 82, 83 degrees, you need to make sure that there's an area of the cage that's still in the 70s so that the chameleons will not overheat. That's paramount. I've always used this. That's been one of the debates on raising Jacksons, is whether or not they can tolerate the higher temperatures. Like I mentioned before, I'm giving every detail of the way I did it. This is how I did it. Diagonal basking light, one small portion of the cage. I rarely would see my Jacksons under here. I did from time to time. Rare that I did. Always provide it just in case, but make sure that for the most part the cage is not under a basking spot. This is the way I've done it. You'll also notice kind of something I've created here with this situation in this cage. Most of the lighting is over here, there's no lighting over here, and there's a lot of steam going on over here. I mentioned earlier that temperature gradients are easier to control in a screen cage. That's what we've got kind of going on here. What you want to shoot for is a warm half of the cage and a cool half. Your chameleon will naturally be able to find his comfort zone. So always make sure that you've got two zones, so to speak. A cooler zone with a smaller, warmer zone. Your chameleon will find where he enjoys being. So make sure your lighting is always placed over to one side. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about hydration and humidity. These are very important elements with Jackson's chameleons because, as I mentioned before, they come from high altitudes, high humidity areas in their natural environment. You got to create this in their cage for them to do well. What you're seeing right here, this steam, is mist from a cool mist humidifier. This is absolutely necessary in my opinion, and like I said, this is my opinion. I use this. I feel that it was a very important tool in raising my Jacksons because it creates this high humidity, cool, wet air that Jackson's chameleons seem to thrive in their natural environment. And you see, I don't know if you can see in the cage here or not, we've got an area over here, it's very dry. The leaves are dry over here. We got an area over here, the leaves are all very wet. High humidity, and I keep it on one side of the cage. If the Jackson wanted to get out of this, he's got an area to get away. I keep this humidity tube. I created this as a PVC pipe. I just piped it up from a cool mist humidifier, drilled some holes in the bottom. It rains mist down in this one area, and in particular over here stays kind of wet. And I don't know if you can see, but he's back here in the wet. He likes it back there. They tend to stay towards the wetter, cooler areas. I'll see him roaming around the cage from time to time. For the most part, he hangs out in this mist. Humidifier, it's very important. Another thing, we got a mist system going on back here. This is a do-it-yourselfer. A lot of people have the Mist King Aquazamp systems. They're very expensive, not really expensive. They're about $100 for the beginning package setup. It's well spent money to go ahead and get a misting system. Set it up on a timer, have several times during the day where it comes on, anywhere from 5-10 minutes to maybe 15 minutes. Get them a good soaking and raining over here. Wet the cage down and let the timer do its job and turn it off at intervaled cycles. If you don't do a mist system of some type, you're going to need to manually mist it with a spray bottle several times a day. Most people are either at work or they're at school. It's rare that someone can devote their entire day to caring to their chameleons. So these misting systems do the job for you when you're not there to do it, and it makes sure that they're getting what they need during that 8 or 9, 10 hour a day when we're not around. It doesn't really do them any good to, go to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and then get home 5, 6 o'clock at night running and start misting. They've went an entire day without it. They start to show signs of dehydration if you let that continue. A misting system is a very, very, very important thing. This humidifier, in my opinion, is a very important thing. Both of these. This humidifier that I have here, I got this from a drugstore. It was about $40. Be sure not to get a warm humidifier. A cool mist ultrasonic humidifier is right back here is my reservoir bucket for my misting system. I've got this tubing that pipes up here to this nozzle, and it's all the wet stuff's concentrated to one side of the cage, all the dry area is over here. It's important to make sure that you have that division in the cage. Warm, cool, and wet. Warm and dry. You see this misting nozzle is going to town right now. It's wetting the leaves down here. And there's a male Jackson sitting in there just enjoying it. Thing with a misting system. Anybody who's had a misting system knows you have to address drainage. Screen cage, it drains right out the bottom. I make these racks that you see here out of PVC pipe. PVC pipe's one of my favorite instruments in using with my Jacksons. I carry all my racks and shelves with them because with chameleons you're talking about water. When you're talking about water with wood, you're talking about rot. Plastic PVC pipe is made to conduct water. It can get wet, it will not rot, it will not warp. Awesome, awesome material to use. It's also like Legos. If I wanted to add on another segment, I could add on another shelf segment to this. Break it down, change it around. I don't glue the joints together, I just slide them together. But anyway, I've got this rack system, and you see I've got this piece of plastic corrugated board. It's kind of bent into a V shape and it slants downhill. All the water. I've also got a plastic backing. I try to get my mist system so that it's spraying more toward the back of the cage. It hits this water, hits this, and runs down. I keep this in my house, and I've never had a problem with any kind of problem on the floor. You just got to direct your water so that it's all hitting this plastic and running down into here, and then you got to have some kind of a reservoir. And you can probably hear it over here. We've got a 5-gallon bucket. Water hits this plastic and runs down the plastic. It's overlapped on this drainage plastic piece on the bottom. It all runs downhill into this bucket. And depending on how you set your cycles, you may have to empty this once, twice a day. I wouldn't think any more than twice a day. I empty mine once a day, and I could usually probably get away with every 2 days. The hydration of Jackson's Chameleon is very important. This humidifier system I've got going on has worked really well with all my babies. All my babies survived. I think this is a key factor in it, making sure that they stay wet. Last but certainly not least, nutrition. Like I mentioned, or may or may have not have mentioned in the first segment of this video, Jacksons have been notorious for getting to a certain point of development, usually about 4 or 5 months of age. They'll be doing great and they drop like flies. I was really worried when I had my first clutch of Jackson's chameleons born. I was well aware, a lot of people have always posted this, and this typically tends to be in a lot of the literature and info that you find online, is that they, some reason, drop dead at this point of their life. I was very, very sure to provide as steady of a diet and tried to base it as much on common sense of what other things we know about raising chameleons as I possibly could. With juvenile chameleons, the main thing, important aspects of their nutrition is protein and calcium. Protein builds muscles, calcium builds bones. Any kind of organism, they need these in order to grow. Any kind of growing animal needs a lot of protein and a lot of calcium for bone and muscle growth. Supplementation is something that a lot of people, that we all know about with raising chameleons. All us chameleon keepers know about dusting and calcium and D3 and all that. The thing about montane species, which are chameleons that come from the mountains, I don't really know the nuts and bolts behind why this is true, but they don't do well with supplementation. I do not know why. I would love to read some studies to clarify why this is the way that it is, but it's just always been told to me, don't over supplement. So with that being said, these calcium dustings, I did them very, very minimally. What I tried to do instead was focus on a good diet for my chameleons. These chameleons that I raised from birth pretty much grew up on a diet of mealworms and crickets and fruit flies. Mealworms making up actually the bulk of it. A lot of people also say don't feed mealworms too much, they'll cause impaction. I've never had a problem with this. These guys right over here, he's 8 or 9, 10 inches long. He was raised on mealworms for the first 2 months of his life. I did not know that my female was going to give birth when I first had them, so I wasn't prepared. I didn't have crickets breeding. It wasn't about 2 months, 3 months down the road where I finally had good levels of crickets going, where I was able to start feeding them crickets. And I also made some rush orders of fruit flies. So fruit flies and mealworms were what they were fed the first 2 months, and then I slowly entered crickets into the scene. I raise my own crickets. I don't order them. It's too expensive. If I ordered all my crickets for all my chameleons, I'd probably spend several $100s a month on shipping charges alone. I just don't do it. I raise my own crickets. What I'm going to touch on is how I raise my crickets. Like I mentioned before, calcium and protein. Calcium, leafy green vegetables, that's what you want to offer. I've got collard greens right here, but I'm going to tell you right now, I don't use collard greens a whole lot. Collard greens and mustard greens to a certain degree have a lot of what's called oxalates. Oxalates bind to calcium, and the calcium isn't able to be absorbed by the chameleon, and they'll pass most of the calcium out. Turnip greens are my first choice. I use turnip greens to feed my crickets. I feed my crickets every day. Turnip greens, and once or twice a week I'll give my crickets a piece of carrot. You don't want to offer carrot all the time. Carrot has a lot of vitamin A. Vitamin A, from what I've read, there's different types of vitamin A. There's proformed and there's preformed. Excessive vitamin A, from what I understand, can cause the condition called edema, where they have swollen joints and swollen areas of the neck. Carrots, maybe once a week. That's all you want to do. You want to do turnip greens every week, or excuse me, every day when you feed your crickets. Sander Chameleon on chameleonforums.com has absolutely the best blogs about nutrition for chameleons and your feeders. Read her blogs. It's the gospel, what she puts out there. Arugulu or Aragulu, whatever it's called, Rocket as it's known as. She mentions that in one of our blogs, so I would completely say that it's safe to use. Whatever you use, it's good to switch up. Like I said, the carrots, I only give them to my crickets about once, maybe twice a week. I offer turnip greens. I also offer yellow squash, and I also offer apple. Those are the 4 main ingredients that I offer as far as fresh vegetables: carrots, yellow squash, turnip greens, and apple. That's all I offer. The greens take care of the calcium aspect. The other thing that's important, the protein. Here is bottled protein right here. Protein has to be the right kind of protein. You don't want to offer animal protein to chameleons. Animal protein being dog food, fish food flakes, cat food. It can cause liver problems and kidney problems in your chameleon. The best type of protein to offer is a vegetable-based protein, and you can't get a better vegetable-based protein than spirulina. You can order this through health food websites. You can get it at health food stores. It's kind of expensive, but you don't have to use a whole lot. I get it in this powder form. You can get it at the health food stores in tablet form, and you can just crush it up and give to your chameleons. But I create a gut load that contains all kinds of good stuff. I'll just list off some of the ingredients that I've gave my gut load to my crickets, which in turn gave to my Jacksons. My Jacksons did great. So it's as follows: protein, spirulina, bee pollen, brewer's yeast. Brewer's yeast provides all the B vitamins. Wheat germ, which makes up the bulk of it, and there's a host of other dried items such as dried papaya, dried apple, alfalfa sprouts, spelt, and honey granola. All those are in my gut load as well. At the end of this video, I'll give a list off of what I provide in my gut load. I'll have to break out the list. It's probably about 15 different items I provide. Make sure you got some spirulina. Kelp powder is another good thing for protein. And make sure you've got these greens for your calcium for your feeders. Alright, this will be the end of my video. I hope anybody who plans on keeping Jacksons, or some of these people that I've seen on Chameleon forums who have had baby Jacksons born unexpectedly, I hope this video helps you out. Jackson's chameleons are one of my favorite species. I've always been intrigued by their prehistoric appearance. I've tried to include every important or relevant aspect of raising them that I've applied to my collection. This guy right here is a male that I had born unexpectedly. This was my first Jacksons I ever had born. You can see he's doing great. He'll be 10 months old this month. And I'm looking forward to my next brood of Jacksons. I can't wait. They're one of my favorite species. Thanks for watching this video, and don't forget, if you're not already a member of chameleonforums.com, go there. It is one of the best resources of information that you can possibly find for raising chameleons. There are some awesome keepers on there and some really great people who have a lot of good information they can offer you. Xantho Man, Action Jackson are a few of them to name that are specifically well versed in raising Jacksons. So I hope you'll enjoy this video. I hope it helped you. If you have any other questions, you can PM me at my YouTube account, or you can go on Chameleon forums and find me under username JDog1027. Good luck, and thanks for watching.